We welcome you into the Cross Country Mortgage Campus here in Berea. I'm Jason Gibbs, alongside Andrew Gribble, episode 5 of the best podcast available, presented by Cross Country Mortgage. Gribbs, Combine in the books, 49 days till the 2022 NFL Draft. Lots of speculation. We get into pro days, free agency's coming. It is just one big avalanche of NFL news. And we haven't even gotten to the big moves of the week, which we will later on in the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real quick shift because it's like last week was almost all about the draft, and you're talking about all these players and getting into it, and now it's just like a total afterthought. Like now we're kind of moving on to pro days, but everything else is taking precedent. It's now the players who are in the NFL right now who are making the headlines, and it'll be that way for the next couple weeks until we get through kind of the first wave of free agency.
Yeah, indeed, and we will preview free agency coming up and obviously talk about some of the big moves that have happened in the National Football League over the last 48 hours. First and foremost, though, Combine Week here and gone. We've survived it. Another year of great eating in Indianapolis. Some tidbits, a little information gathering as well. Your big takeaway from the 2022 NFL Combine?
I mean, maybe it was just me, but it was like we didn't have like any of those like disaster workouts or like people like that didn't do well at the Combine. I felt like it was like this guy did well, then these guys did well. Like it was like a total like dudes showing out at higher levels than people expected. You had the wide receivers, like seemingly every one of those guys ran great 40s and were having great workouts. Then the day that Georgia's defensive players just dominated and have kind of risen up the ranks that way. Then you have the guy from Baylor, the corner, running the fastest 40 ever by a defensive back. So it was just like, it was like you said, like it was an avalanche of like good news, whereas you didn't really have anything outside of Kenny Pickett's hand size that was like a negative that came out of the Combine. You're not hearing that like the buzz of this guy tanked this interview or this guy's stock is falling. It seemed like it was all stock up instead of stock down, and I don't know if that's just a byproduct of how we're covering the sport now or if it's how these guys are preparing for the Combine better. I mean, it just seemed like it was the feel-good week of all these guys are really good, and it's something that we hadn't heard much of going into this draft because this was not a quarterback draft, and it just seems like it's as people have said, a meat and potatoes draft where not a lot of superstars. But now you're looking at it, and some of these players, it's looking like a better board where the Browns sit at number 13.
Yeah, again, the positions that showed up and showed out are the ones that we thought were going to, and also maybe the Browns' biggest positions of need.
Yeah. No, it was wide receivers on that first day. All those guys looked outstanding. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave runs the great 40 as well. Treylon Burks had a slower 40, but he's 225 pounds, so you understand it's a little bit tougher to get moving.
Like 4.55.
Yeah, he's going to be a really good player. He's going to be a first-round pick. It just maybe it recalibrates people's expectations, and maybe he's going to go where he was supposed to go, but we'll see. He still could be the first wide receiver off the board, but then really, it was these defensive guys from Georgia that kind of stood out, whereas we all knew about Jordan Davis, the defensive tackle, but these other two guys are kind of hummed under the radar and one of the best defenses, not just in college football last year, but really the past decade. You haven't had a dominant defense like Georgia's. All these guys, the trio of defensive linemen, they're all going to be first-round picks, and it's a matter of it seemed like the Browns at 13 would have been a reach for some of those guys, and now we're seeing mocks with multiple of those guys ahead of the Browns at 13.
All right. Combine, as we start to put it to bed, how much stock do we put in these individual drills? You know, I mean, the 40-yard dash obviously garnered a lot of attention, especially with how the wide receivers ran it. But how much stock do you think these teams, including our own, are putting in these individual workouts? Or is it a case of, let me go see it in the pro day? Because there were still a lot of guys that didn't do a lot of things.
Yeah, I still think it's a box checking thing. I think I feel like you can only hurt yourself with these things because I don't think you have guys outside of maybe the rare exceptions doing things that teams did not expect them to do. Maybe teams did not expect Jordan Davis at 344 pounds to run as fast as he did because you never, ever see him running that far, and he will never run that way again unless he's maybe chasing one of his teammates on a pick six. I mean, these things are that's out of the ordinary for an offensive for a defensive lineman. So I think really it's more of if these guys don't show up in the way that they should, that it becomes a problem. I think it's all the behind-the-scenes stuff. It's the medicals. It's how they interview. That's why the combine is super important. It's just not the stuff that you see on TV. I think this is a good kind of way to introduce fans to this is why I think the combine's a great event for TV as well, because it kind of, for the hardcore NFL fan that really doesn't follow college football intently, the combine's kind of the first big event where you get introduced and kind of explained who is going to be a first-round pick, and it really kind of helps the educational process going into the draft.
All right, you mentioned Kenny Pickett's hands. Obviously not as big, and he was one of the leaders in fumbles in college football in 2021. Yet, we see on Wednesday, Todd McShay puts out his post-combine mock draft, and the first quarterback off the board is at number 11 to Washington, and it's Kenny Pickett. So clearly willing to overlook the hand size.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I don't think there's any clear favorite on who's going to take a quarterback. I mean, maybe we will get some more clarity after free agency and see how things shake out that way. It's going to come down to team and fit, and I think that while a lot of people talk about Kenny Pickett's hand size, it seemed like Malik Willis had a really good week and was really an impressive guy, and I think there's a chance that he becomes that first guy off the board. I mean, the Seahawks trade of Russell Wilson kind of adds a team to the mix at number 9 that could be in need for a quarterback, even though they're basically replacing the Broncos, who previously needed a quarterback. I don't think any of us really thought Denver was going to go the rookie route. But now, with the way Seattle's looking to rebuild potentially without Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, and maybe some other guys, some familiar faces not there anymore, that becomes maybe a more likely destination for quarterback. I still think that both quarterbacks, both of those guys, I think are off the board by the time the Browns are on the clock at 13, and that's good news for the Browns because you're not drafting a quarterback here. You're opening up more opportunities to get a great position player.
Yes, they will start to move into the top 10, especially after their pro days.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can all agree on that. NFL Network analytics expert Cynthia Frelund will join us here coming up in just a few minutes. We talked with her last week at the NFL Combine, and we'll get her thoughts on free agency and this draft class as we get ready for the 2022 NFL Draft, 49 days away. Gribble. It's a tradition unlike any other. Gribble asking us to come up with our first mock draft 1.0. I cursed him. I put it together as best we could. Gribble wanted us to put together the top 13 picks, obviously the Browns picking at 13. And then you also had instructions for the second-round pick and the 2 picks in the third round, including that compensatory pick at the end.
Should be around 100-ish. We'll see where it falls, but that's why we don't have a specific number with it just yet.
All right.
All projections.
And you can read all of our mock drafts, mine, Andrew Gribble's, Nathan Zagura's, Anthony Posell's at clevelandbrowns.com. But we do want to go through our picks for the Browns. And Gribble, I'll start with you. Garrett Wilson at number 13. I think something we would all be quite pleased with. But you have the wide receiver from Ohio State.
Yeah, and I do the kind of I like him as the top guy. I think that he just is the mix of kind of everything and has that true potential to be a number 1 wide receiver, the one I feel the best about. And really, the reason I'm concerned is that I have it going in which he's the first wide receiver off the board, and I worry if another team ahead of the Browns wants to address wide receiver, that they would have similar feelings about Garrett Wilson. Though I would not be disappointed with Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, even potentially Drake London, seeing how he's coming off the ankle surgery. There's good options there if you want a wide receiver at number 13. I was torn between Garrett Wilson, potentially Jermaine Johnson from Florida State, because I think pass rushers is a huge need for this team as well, and it's easier to get wide receivers later in the draft than it is pass rushers. But I still just went with Garrett Wilson, with the hometown flavor on that pick, and I think it's something that could be a possibility, but I think it's no guarantee he gets the 13.
Yeah, as I was putting this together, I'm like, well, Garrett could go here. He could go here. There's 2 or 3 teams in front of you. Atlanta now has a need at wide receiver.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Could the Jets add a wide receiver to their group? Could the Giants, who even went, free agency happy in spending last year at wide receiver, could they go get a rookie wide receiver? I think that's totally in play. I want to take wide receiver. I really do, and ultimately I probably will. But as I put this together, you mentioned it just a few minutes ago. My big concern is that defensive end, can you find a day 1 starter in the second round?
Yeah.
I think you can at wide receiver. I'm not so sure you can do it at defensive end. And that's I ended up taking Travon Walker from Georgia. Defensive line is going to be a big need, and not just at edge, but at defensive tackle as well. We'll get into that as we get into round 2 and 3 of our mock. I just think that size, length, toughness, he's part of that Georgia wrecking crew, and I think that he makes a lot of sense for this football team. I would not be surprised if they go edge. I still think wide receiver obviously is their biggest need, but free agency could dictate a lot here in the next week.
Yeah, and Travon Walker has the ability to play inside, outside, a bigger guy, a bigger pass rusher, would kind of look even maybe more like an Olivier Vernon type on the outside there. The problem for you is that many people are noticing Travon Walker now. Dane Brugler, Lance Zierlein both moved Travon Walker all the way up to number 3 in their mock draft. So that to me could be a potential combine overreaction because he had a fantastic combine. So maybe he regresses back down to the edge, but a lot of people are starting to notice him because before this, it seemed like he was bottom half of the first round type of guy, and now all of a sudden just shooting through the roof.
Yeah, 6 sacks for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2021. In the second round at 44, you have a guy that I took at pick number 78 in the third round. We're thinking along the same lines. Defensive tackle, Perion Winfrey, Oklahoma defensive tackle, a guy who has started to show up on people's radar since the season ended.
He was a total monster at the Senior Bowl, and it was kind of like there wasn't a ton of high expectations for this defensive tackle class going into that period of the draft time, but it seems like all these guys just keep doing impressive things, starting with the Georgia guys, and then Winfrey as well. I just look at this simply as of now, today, you've got 2 guys locked in for next year, Tommy Togiai and Jordan Elliott. It's wide open. I do think it's a position you can address and fill some holes in with free agency, so that could change over the next couple weeks. But this is someone where if you want to keep building and getting some good young players in the building, the second round is probably a good spot to do it.
Yeah, and I have him going in the third. My pick in the second round, total, I just kind of tweaked the draft to fit my needs. Jahan Dotson from Penn State obviously probably won't be there at pick 44, but I think if the Browns go edge rusher at 13, I think the Browns could totally move up into the early part of the second round, if not late first round, if there's a guy on the wide receiver board that slips. I think that's totally in play.
No, I think it's definitely in play. And then again, the Andrew Berry likes like the way last year when he traded up to get a linebacker. He said, no one ever said I would trade up, and no one ever would ever say I would take a linebacker in the second round. He did both. So I don't think you can rule out any kind of move. You've got 9 picks. You've got that compensatory pick. You've got the ability to move up and down the board as much as you want, and this is a team that's shown the ability to do that the last couple of years.
All right, Perion Winfrey from Oklahoma, your second round pick, my third round pick. Pick number 78 for the Browns. Gribbs, who do you have the Cleveland Browns taking?
So I'm going with the edge, and I'm going with a talented guy from South Carolina, Kingsley Enagbare from the Gamecocks. Again, it's just a position that you want to address in some way, shape, or form. Myles Garrett is in that room. Jadeveon Clowney might be in that room. Even if Clowney comes back, you've got to address some high-quality assets to that position because free agency, not a lot of guys to be found at that position because if you're a good pass rusher, teams are holding on to you. You have to add to that room, which was something you couldn't do last year. There was really not a lot of quality pass rushers in last year's entire draft, let alone early in the draft. So I just think you've got to go in that direction with one of your 4 picks on day 1 and day 2, and I just think he fits kind of in that sweet spot in the third round after a pretty good Senior Bowl performance.
Again, I took Winfrey in the third round as well. The compensatory pick, the famous compensatory pick at the end of round 3. Who do you have the Cleveland Browns take?
So I'm going with the tight end, and I'm making people happy by taking another Ohio State Buckeye, Jeremy Ruckert. I just think this is a position where the NFL right now, we saw 3 tight ends get the franchise tag, kind of an abnormal amount with David Njoku, Dalton Schultz, Mike Gesicki. Not your top huge headliner names, but it just shows that the value of that position continues to grow. There's big numbers salary-wise going to the tight ends in the league. They hang around forever. I look at Ruckert as maybe not a guy that comes in right away and makes an impact, but it's a long-term investment. You have to kind of groom these guys, get them ready because tight ends get hurt a lot. It's a demanding position. You need that depth. And even though the Browns right now are shaping up to have a lot of depth, especially with Steve Carlson coming back, I think you need even more, and I think that's how you go about it with a big pick like that.
Well, the Browns play 3 tight ends.
Yeah.
So you better have a couple ready to go just in case.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think that's the big key there. For me, at around pick 101 in that compensatory pick range, David Bell, the wide receiver out of Purdue, runs really precise routes, has great hands, make plays, probably a slot receiver in the National Football League. Not fast, but again, a playmaker. And the more wide receivers that you can get, there's a lot of holes in that wide receiver room. You need a lot of bodies. And, I mean, you're probably going to carry 6, maybe 7 wide receivers on your football team. Right now, you've got 3.
Yeah.
So,
got to load up. And David Bell had a lot of good things to say about Greg Newsome at the Combine. Said it was his hardest cover in college football. So maybe reunite those two. Get them going on the practice fields again.
All right, as we put the NFL Combine to bed, last week at the Combine, I had a chance to sit down with NFL Network analytics expert Cynthia Frelund, great friend of a lot of our programs, comes on, great insight, and a lot of good insight on her favorite time of the year, which is the 2022 NFL Draft and this 2022 NFL Draft class. Have a watch and have a listen. Happy to be joined right now on the best podcast available by Cynthia Frelund, NFL Network analytics expert and part of the NFL Network's draft coverage here at the 2022 Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. And it's good to see you actually in person. And
nice.
I'm sorry the rest of the crew isn't here right now. But
hi to them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Busy week, but it's great to be back, and COVID protocols are now lifted. The world kind of getting back to normal here in the National Football League.
It definitely feels normal. Like, I thought it was funny. You can hear behind us, like, the guys announcing that they're not going to be participating in the bench press because they hurt their ankle. We are back to normal. Like, that is hilarious. I will not be participating in the bench press because I hurt my ankle. And you're like, that doesn't, okay, whatever you say.
Yeah. I can do one, maybe, so I'm out.
But I don't know what my ankle has to do with the bench press, but
Correct.
Doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Don't let the details get in the way of a good story, you know?
So what your role here in Indianapolis this week?
Yeah.
You get put through the ringer. I think everybody at NFL Network does. There's a lot of hours that go into it, a lot of people doing a lot of things. What's a typical day for you here in Indianapolis?
Well, first off, this is my favorite event on the calendar. All of the teams are here.
On NFL.com.
Yes, it's all the teams are here. Everyone is 0-0. It is all full of hope and excitement, and everyone's like just stoked to be here. So the cool part is I'm doing some of our pregame coverage, pregame meeting before all the events are run. So we're kind of looking at what you should be watching for, and then of course dissecting what happened. But what we're really here to do is to like figure out, like, I can tell you the ranges of things that people have fallen into in the past, like elite and above average players. Like, where did they test when they were here? And you kind of try to map who could potentially be those players who are going to be coming out who are above average and elite. But I'm going to tell you, the main value of being here is getting a chance to talk to your coach, talk to your front office members who I love the Browns. Like, I've got a couple of friends who are are members of your staff, and the way that they all think and kind of what's going to be next in the NFL based on what you're learning here, right? I'm sure you learn the same stuff too. It's like, wow, like I have some thoughts on, how we could use this late round tight end. And so it's all so exciting. So I think mostly what we're here to do is I'm here to learn. Even though we talk about it on TV, I am here to learn. I'm a sponge here.
Well, and I think that I've asked everybody this week, like, what's the biggest thing you're looking for? Like, and it's a lot of it is the meetings that take place when you're not in the convention center, when you're not in the football.
Yep.
Maybe it's in a bar, maybe it's in St. Elmo's, maybe it's
yes,
somewhere
it's a tiring week.
but you're constantly at 10 o'clock at night. You could learn more about something than you would maybe at 10 o'clock in the morning here.
I literally this morning went down to get a coffee and ran into someone from each team in the NFC North and learned more in about 15 minutes than I did for several hours, and it's just crazy. Like it's you just got to know when to ask and not be afraid to ask it, because everyone here is a wealth of knowledge and they're more than willing to share with you. So it's great. I learned a ton. I got a chance to talk to your coach last night, and I'm beyond impressed. Awesome.
Okay, so. Yeah, because of COVID, you probably
never met him before.
Yeah, exactly. Nope. What impressions of the Browns front office? And, I think we can all agree last year was not the way that we wanted things to go, but you're still right in the mix, and you're, a couple tweaks away from being
You're
right
in a
back
really hard division, too.
Yeah, a
like
little
you
bit.
should maybe like move over to the NFC. Like NFC North, probably a little easier than what's going
I'm
on in your
fairly
situation.
confident Coach said that yesterday on our show. Like relocation? Great.
Yeah, I know.
Great.
Can you do that? Anyways, but just for this 1 year, right? Like if Aaron Rodgers leaves the NFC North, can we just like come? Anyways, let's just say it. But no, like I was so there's the guy in your office. He never promotes himself, so I'm going to promote him. His name's Glenn Cook, and someday you will not have him there because he is a rising star, and Andrew Berry's a star already. So just so smart and so interesting to talk to, and it's like, how can I be thinking of this thing different? And not even a position that you guys need. And the way he was able to articulate and thoughtfully execute, like, you don't need this position. So I'm telling you, you don't need this position. So when I asked him, it wasn't like, I was just like, how can I be better at watching film on a confusing position that I don't understand as well? And he was able to break, and that reminded me how communication is just the key to all of it. Right? Like being simple with it. And same thing with your coach. When we're, chatting with him about just overall philosophies, simple, because that is the best way we all learn. Every single one of us.
It is impressive what Andrew Berry has put together from a front office standpoint. Kwesi now in Minnesota.
I know, I interviewed him yesterday.
He's
awesome.
He's an unbelievable human. Glenn Cook, in addition to being a great basketball player and golfer on the side.
He was a baseball player too.
Yeah,
you know that?
correct.
Miami.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's done everything. We love Glenn, but
yeah.
I mean, Glenn was a finalist for that position as well, and
I know.
There's a lot of great guys with AB and with Kevin. Same thing. You're trotting back your entire coaching staff for a third year, and that can only help, I would think, from a big picture standpoint.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to be excited for. Like, I'm like technically like by birth a Lions fan, I guess. So I have like a kindred spirit with the Browns. We just kind of get each other, So I'm like, I want you guys to win. The Lions will never win one, so I need the Browns to do that for me because that's how this works.
You know what though? I'm a fan of your coach. I think
kneecap biting.
Yeah, but
no,
it seems to be playing pretty well.
I'm be honest with you. As far as humans go, he's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's. Well, it remains to be seen. Out. Remains to be seen what will happen. But as far as humans go, he's super kind and super. The energy is real. The love of the game is real. Like, what more do you want? Like, he's a football dude.
All right, from an analytics standpoint, from a numbers standpoint, what kind of numbers do you go back and look at when this is all put to bed? 4 days down, and all of a sudden now we're going to get into pro days, free agencies coming, and all that.
Yep.
It's just going to be a tidal wave of things all the way up through the draft. But what are you looking at after this is come and gone?
I'm going to make sure no one's out of range, because if you do something weird, like if you run really slow, or sometimes if you run fast, diminishing returns for speed, though. Like, as long as you're in the ranges, if you go above it, like John Ross, okay, there's diminishing returns at certain things, right? So going to look at the ranges to see, did someone fall out of range in a bad way? Maybe go back to the film then to see, is something wrong with my assessment? Did I not see this right? Or maybe they're not keeping themselves in shape. So ask those questions after and kind of plan my attack for smaller school guys that I don't know as much about, because I'm able to easily I use a lot of film, and I use computer vision on the film, and it's really easy to get Power 5 guys. But the guys who don't go to those schools, it's much more difficult to get their film, to watch it, and the amount of it that I like to feel comfortable with. You want more data is better. So after this, I'll be looking to see some of the smaller school guys who impress.
All right. How many hours a week are you watching tape?
Well, last week, because the compression of having like only 1 week between the Super Bowl and now, like that was a little aggressive. Like my eyes hurt from it. But in a normal week, probably about 30 to 40, because I do it pretty consistently during the season too. Like I go back and I watch a little bit of college. I get to be a fan a little bit more, during the actual college football season. But we start bowl games, we start, and then during playoffs when there's fewer NFL games, and then I'll really start going back on tape. So I never really stop, but 30 to 40, it's a lot.
Okay, so from a career standpoint, your career continues to take off.
Yeah,
you did
nice.
the Bills sideline in the preseason.
I know you guys never invite me. That I'm just saying.
We didn't play you,
Andrew. Man, no, I'm saying they invited me. I was allowed to do that with the NFL Network. Maybe Andrew would like to invite me.
Are you going to do it again this year?
I don't know. No one's invited me yet. We'll have to see. Kevin?
Maybe.
Coach?
No pressure. No pressure, everybody. The decision makers that make more than I do. What about your experience with the Shrine Bowl?
Yeah, I loved the Shrine Bowl.
Well, if you're a big draft person, that really is an underrated game that gives you
the Shrine
access.
Bowl. Okay, so Senior Bowl, they typically get more of the guys you've heard of, right? Shrine
Correct.
Bowl, you got to grind some tape for that. And you got to grind some tape for that. And that's why I really loved it. And also those guys were like incredibly receptive to, they came and asked amazing questions like, how can I be a better interviewee? Because some of the because they all do interviews with teams at the time. And they say, you want to, I'm like, look them in the eye, whatever the question is, just repeat it back. But they're really asking if they care, and these are guys who are really, truly love the sport. And some of them are super fun. Like there's a couple guys that really bonded with, right? Like I really like the tight end out of Virginia, Jelani Woods. I think he's going to be a great addition to someone's team. He's huge. And meaning you just get a chance to learn like who these people are a little bit more than he transferred. He wasn't, his name doesn't roll off the tongue like some of the other guys like Trey McBride who had like all of the catches, but this is going to be a good addition to someone's team.
All right. On that note, and final question here, I'll let you go. Appreciate the time today.
Yeah.
The wide receiver class.
Love.
Because everybody in Cleveland wants to know what's going to happen. It's looking that way. It's early. There's still 2 months. There's free agency.
There's a lot.
It's a loaded wide receiver class. It's a loaded edge rusher class.
Yep.
And a lot of people would say that's probably the two biggest needs for this football team. How do you see it early on here?
Yeah, I think I mocked you like Drake London, who I really love.
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't know if I might have to refine that after some of the things that I'm learning about like what was asked of players. One of the cool things about the Combine, you get to ask what was asked of them, because I can tell you their resume that they didn't run the entire route tree, or but why? Was it because they couldn't, or because they weren't asked to? Because those are two separate things. Remember USC, they had some coaching things go on. It was so you're learning just a ton in these opportunities. This is an opportunity to learn, right? So I don't know. It's definitely, I think the wide receiver class, I think it's going to be 6 of one, half a dozen of another. And I trust the staff to be accurately value whichever one. Go up, go down a little bit, get the right one. Use that draft equity to get the ones that you want. And then take some flyers on the back end with some wide receivers that are maybe not as well known or maybe not as well understood, and see what happens. But I think you're going to get, I have a lot of faith in this. It's going to be interesting.
Thanks to Cynthia Frelund, NFL Network analytics expert and NFL Network analyst, covering the league and covering this draft, getting ready for the 22 NFL draft, between her and Bucky Brooks last week on the best podcast available. A lot of good insight on this 2022 draft class.
Yeah, Parade of Stars for both CBD and best podcast available. I think we did good with the booking this year.
Yeah,
that was all you.
A solid week done by everybody. So some good stuff from her. And again, we're 49 days out from the NFL draft. More importantly right now, though, we turn our attention to the guys already in the league. As Gribble mentioned earlier, it is free agency. And free agency is quickly approaching here. And the Browns really kicked things off this week. In what has been a crazy week around the league, the Browns with the first move, franchising tight end David Njoku.
Yeah, and it's first for some historical perspective. The first time the Browns have used the franchise tag, not on a kicker. This is signs. I mean, this is when you get,
we are moving up in the world.
This is progress, and I think that it made a lot of sense with kind of the indication that this is just kind of maybe the start of something with David Njoku, but it locks him in for what will be his 6th season with the Browns. And I think he had moments last year that really showed growth both on the field, off the field, and just kind of the potential that maybe could be realized in this offense. Still just 25 years old. I mean, we talked about a draft prospect that's 24 that was being linked to the Browns. So that it just shows how much more football David Njoku has left to play. And I think that there's ways to even get him even more involved in the passing game. You saw what he could do on the longest catch by any NFL tight end this year against the Chargers. A good weapon to have back on this offense. I definitely don't think that this was a team that was getting better by letting David Njoku out the building. So a good first step.
Yeah, it was clearly a priority for this football team since the season ended.
Yeah,
was to bring him back and find a way to bring him back. And you said something earlier about tight ends, and there not being a lot of them around. I mean, look how many teams franchise tagged a tight end here this week.
Yeah, it was kind of a lower number, so it wasn't one of those kind of, some of these positions can kind of get out of hand with the number on the franchise tag. But more importantly, I mean, you look at like the one that was kind of jarring happened before franchise tags, but like a guy like Ian Thomas with the Carolina Panthers, not a headliner name, not a guy you probably have on any of your fantasy teams, but signs a pretty big deal, and it's just showing that it's just a tough position. I mean, it's why guys like when when a team like when the Browns let go of Darren Fells, you saw him land with another team right away.
Sure.
You saw him play for multiple years after that. I mean, if you can play that position, you can play in the league for 10 plus years at least. I just think it's just a supply issue right now in the league. I don't know if it's going to get fixed anytime soon, but the guys that can play it at the position. I mean, look at Jason Witten went in the booth and then came back and contributed. It's just something that teams need a lot of. They're incorporating this personnel more, whereas you don't see it at the college level as much. So that's why these guys are harder to find. And it's just kind of added up to, it's not quite quarterbacks and it's not quite some of the other pass rushers or other positions, but teams are looking for these guys and they're hard to find.
Well, and again, this could just be a placeholder for a bigger extension. We've seen some teams, franchise players, that basically are working toward a bigger deal and just ran out of time. They don't want to let the guy walk in free agency or even explore other options. So franchise him, and that gives you a little more time. They have till, I think, mid-July.
Yeah, you've got some time to get it worked out. Obviously, you want to get it done sooner or later if that's what both sides are looking to get out of this. So we'll see. But Dave Njoku, a guy that has expressed his desire to stay here, want to be a part of what the Browns are building, and he'll be here for at least one more year and hopefully many more.
All right, as we turn our attention to free agency, the timeline for the next week and what the legal tampering, as we like to call it, and then the official start of the new year. When can legal tampering officially begin?
Begins Monday at noon. So but you're already starting to see the activity. This is like kind of the NFL's almost like de facto like trade deadline type week, like how other sports have like a lot of activity around the trade deadline. It seems like there's a lot of activity this time of year. We already saw the blockbuster deal with Russell Wilson and the Broncos, saw the news about Aaron Rodgers' extension, which kind of shakes things up or does the opposite of keeps things the way they were. But this is where you can have a lot of activity, but really teams cannot announce anything until Wednesday at 4:00 at the absolute earliest for some of these deals. So you can put out the cryptic tweets from the team accounts, but you can't do much more than that until the midweek.
The media can speculate. The media can announce things unofficially. Officially, we can announce things at 4:00 next Wednesday.
Yeah,
that's how that looks. You mentioned it. I mean, Aaron Rodgers. I think when we left the Combine last week, there was a sense of much ado about nothing. I think we really thought that everybody was going to stay put from a quarterback standpoint. It appeared Aaron Rodgers was going to stay with Green Bay. It sounded like Russell Wilson was going to stay with the Seattle Seahawks. And then you were going to turn your attention to that next tier of quarterbacks. Well, Aaron does re-sign with the Packers, and I think they're still working out the details on that contract. But Rodgers himself has tweeted he'll be back with Green Bay next year. Then out of nowhere, 2 hours later, a blockbuster deal, Denver trading for Russell Wilson, giving up 3 players, giving up 5 draft picks. Am I correct on that?
A total of 5. They got one back.
Yeah, they got one back. So, but they get Russell Wilson. They get the quarterback that they have desperately needed since Peyton Manning retired from the football team. And for Seattle, then, they go and they cut ties with 8-time All-Pro Bobby Wagner later in the day. So 2 guys that were drafted on the same day that helped lead Seattle to their first ever Super Bowl, no longer with the team. Seattle doesn't have any players left from that Super Bowl team. And wondering now what the Seahawks do at pick number 9 in front of us.
Well, I mean, they're a team that could go with a quarterback. They're a team that now is being tossed into the Deshaun Watson conversation. So that would be you go the Watson route. That's a quicker turnaround on whether you're competing or not, especially in the NFC now, which is just depleted of elite quarterbacks. I mean, you've got Aaron Rodgers and a couple others, but that's really about it. And I think the thing that I agreed with you, I think I came away from the Combine thinking the only 2 quarterbacks that were going to move this offseason were Deshaun Watson and Jimmy Garoppolo. And even Jimmy Garoppolo, I was on the fence with. I was like, I was thinking to myself, if they can work out something with Jimmy, especially when we're seeing what it might cost to acquire him, which doesn't seem like much, I was like, are the 49ers getting better by moving on from him, or can they buy another year of him at that position and to let Trey Lance continue to develop? So I came away thinking it was going to be even more conservative, but obviously this Russell Wilson thing shakes things up, and it truly reaffirms the fact, do not believe much of what is said at the Combine, because there was the whole notion of trading Russell Wilson was soundly rejected by folks in the Seahawks, and then out of nowhere this comes to be. It'll be interesting. I think Denver gets better, obviously. I don't know how much better. And Seattle, for the return on their haul, it gets them back to square one with their draft picks. It doesn't put them in a situation like the Eagles or the Giants or Jets where they have multiple picks. This gets the Seahawks back to a normal amount of draft picks because they parted with so many in what is now turned into a pretty not great trade for Jamal Adams. I mean, so this doesn't kind of set the table for Seattle in the way that some of these other blockbuster deals have for these other teams.
Yeah, I definitely – Seattle, you're back to square one. You still have some offensive pieces. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with Lockett. We don't know what's going to happen with DK Metcalf. Still a lot to watch and see how things unfold up in Seattle. Meanwhile, it's business as usual for Green Bay. They're busy creating more cap room because obviously they franchised Devontae Adams. Tampa Bay franchising Godwin. Mike Williams in L.A. with the Chargers gets an extension. They were going to franchise him. Ultimately, he ends up signing his extension. You know, we talked about the impact of the quarterbacks, but the top 3 wide receivers in free agency are off the board.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's much of an impact when it comes to other teams in the league because I don't think most teams probably never anticipated these guys ever hitting the market, even Mike Williams, because I think that you look around the league, and I think historically, if you're a really good wide receiver that your team drafted, you typically make it to the second contract. It's not like running back, whereas you're still getting some great value by extending those guys. Most teams hold on to their top wide receivers for at least a second deal before letting them go. And I think Mike Williams has been up and down, has dealt with some injuries, but I think you've got Justin Herbert. You've got a ton of cap space. There's no reason not to bring him back. And with Adams, honestly, I was most surprised with Godwin because I'm just looking at the Bucs without a quarterback, potentially having Blaine Gabbert as their starter. Why not do what Seattle's doing right now and kind of go down or at least get the extension in the works with him, which they may be doing because he could be the future there. But it seemed like it seemed more like a win now move when they're not set up to win now without Tom Brady.
Yeah. I definitely think that Tampa Bay is someone that bears watching in everything. Obviously, this Deshaun Watson situation sounds like it could come to a head here. We should know a little bit more maybe going into the weekend, and that's going to play a role, I think, in free agency. But, you know, from a wide receiver standpoint and from a quarterback standpoint, the top guys are where they're going to be. And now you take a look big picture at those positions, and, you know, there's definitely a step down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's not that it is what it is from a talent standpoint. So what do you think the Browns could address in free agency? Like, what positions are strongest in free agency maybe?
I still think there's a lot of good depth at both defensive tackle and wide receiver to help you out. Maybe, and it's maybe not enough to change your draft strategy type of depth, but I think you can get some pieces in play, whereas that's what the Browns have done, where you set yourself up in the draft to really go after the best player you want instead of kind of pigeonholing yourself into having to take a certain player. I think I look at guys like maybe the Falcons want to bring him back more now, but like a guy like a Russell Gage or someone like that may not be your number one guy, but can come in and start for you and help you out. I think there's defensive tackles all the way down to a guy that's familiar with here, like Larry Ogunjobi's on the market. There's a lot of guys like that can come in, maybe not going to generate the biggest headlines, but that's not what free agency should be about for you if you're looking at kind of long-term success. It's there to fill some spots, some holes and help you out in the short term. And I think there's enough guys at those kind of positions that can help you out and kind of make you feel better about the depth across this roster than you do right now when you're looking at it and seeing only 2 defensive tackles, a couple wide receivers. It'll look a little different here in the next week.
mean, could they bolster that offensive line a little bit?
Right.
You know, this could be the spot where you do that. And linebacker. This team defensively has lost a few players.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even getting some depth at the edge rusher position, maybe it's not a start, but maybe it's a solid rotation guy. Definitely someone in play. Salary cap wise, it's not the Browns are in a different position than in past years. They don't have the most money to spend.
No, don't have the most, but definitely don't have the least.
Correct.
You're kind of right in the middle, and I think with some guys on the roster, most notably probably Denzel Ward, you're probably in the works of hopefully bringing back for long term. So you got to budget that money and spend smartly. But like you mentioned, linebacker. Last 2 years, you've gone and gotten your starting linebacker for that year in free agency. starting Mike linebacker. I mean, so again, Anthony Walker's set to hit free agency. Do you bring him back? Do you go after someone else? I mean, that's a position that all of a sudden kind of comes to the forefront as well, unless you're going forward with Jacob Phillips at Mike, which is a big possibility, but you still would want to add some kind of veteran depth there as well.
Yeah, a lot to be decided, a lot to be determined. We will be back with you next week for our free agency special. We'll also break in. As breaking news warrants, we'll join you for special editions of the best podcast available all next week as well, should news warrant it. Make sure you keep it locked to clevelandbrowns.com and all of the Browns media platforms, including Cleveland Browns Daily. The 2-minute drill with Zagura, youtube.com/Browns for all the latest news and information as we get into free agency and free agency week. It promises to be entertaining and crazy as always. Gribbs, appreciate the time, and we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good.
All right. Make sure you like and subscribe today to the best podcast available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out, youtube.com/Browns. Thanks to the birthday boy, Jeff McDaniel, for all of his hard work. For Andrew Gribble, I'm Jason Gibbs. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the best podcast available, presented by Cross Country Mortgage.